To our third session in our monthly Lunch and Learn series. Per usual, Revolution Group will be discussing topics of interest for best practices for your small to medium business. If there's a topic you are personally interested in discussing in future webinars, please feel free to tweet at @rev_group using the hashtag Lunch and Learn, and we will take that topic into consideration. As many of you know, we are a premier IT consultant based in Westerville, serving the greater Columbus area for over 20 years. Today's discussion is on the release of the RevON Cloud, and I am again joined today by our IT architect, Scott Coffman, who will dive a little deeper into this release throughout the presentation. If there are any questions throughout, feel free to type them in the browser, and we will address all questions at the conclusion of the presentation. So without further ado, here's Scott Coffman.
Thanks, Scott. Really excited to talk about RevON Cloud and what actually today is the actual release of RevON Cloud. It's been something we've been working on the last 5 or 6 months. Some of you may have heard us talking about it in the past as something that's coming along, and it is now available to all of our managed services customers, and we're really excited to talk about it today. When we talk about RevON Cloud, it really is, as the slide says, an opportunity for transformation. And what that means, it's really a way for you to transform how your business uses your server infrastructure, your network infrastructure, and what that could look like for you going into the future. Before we get too far into what RevON Cloud is and how it can benefit your business, I really like to start with kind of a definition of cloud. So if we look at kind of the Webster's dictionary definition of cloud computing, it's kind of a long-winded definition that states a pay-per-use model for enabling convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. It's kind of vague and confusing. Really, when we talk about the cloud as it relates to small and medium businesses, what this really relates to or means is about moving your compute workloads off-premise and delivering them as an anytime, anywhere service. So when we talk off-premise, that's just a fancy word for saying it's not in your building. On-premise is having your infrastructure in-house, off-premise is having it at some other facility, whether it be a data center or a cloud provider. Just a couple other definitions before we get into kind of RevON Cloud. When I mention workloads, that really just means an application, whether it be your line of business application, your email service, maybe it's file shares or print shares. These are really just workloads, and we're going to treat them as such in this discussion. So cloud is really kind of thought of as a utility service. So it allows you to get access to a server infrastructure on a pay-as-you-go model, much like you get electricity. And kind of using that analogy, if we look back into the early 1900s, most industrial manufacturing facilities had their own power plant. And matter of fact, in 1907, it's reported that 70% of the industrial electrical generation was done in-house, on-premise. But if you look in the 1920s, that same percentage was generated by utility companies. Initially, you had to build your own power plant to build the power you need because there was not an effective way of delivering that service to the manufacturing facility. But later it became a disadvantage because it wasn't cost effective, because the utility companies can do kind of a efficiency by scale, delivering this service at a much cheaper cost than you delivering it yourself in-house. And we're really seeing the same sort of transition in small and medium businesses as it relates to kind of the cloud. It really can be thought of as a utility service, and I think in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years, it's really you're gonna look back and think, wow, I can't believe we actually had servers in house and had to have all of these big power hungry heat noisy machines sitting in our closet or whatever it may be to serve our business. As we look at the types of cloud services, the cloud is just as I mentioned, a generic term of an anytime, anywhere, always available service. And as such, the cloud can take a few different forms. And just to touch on those real quick, kind of some different types, starting with platform as a service. This would be if you had a application you wanted to write. Instead of writing the application in-house on .NET or whatever your programming language of choice would be and kind of building that application and then deploying it out, you could hop on to a platform as a service cloud provider and build your application in their environment and taking advantage of all the programming utilities that they can provide, and they would maintain the updating of those back-end tools and platform. Some examples of platform as a service providers would be Microsoft Azure, Amazon SimpleDB platform, and Google App Engine. The next type of cloud service, software as a service, this is where you use a provider's application as opposed to using it in-house. And some of these providers, they may have cloud solutions, and also they may have solutions that you can build in your own on-premise. But for many cases, this is a cloud-only or a browser-only type of application. Some examples of this would be Office 365 and Salesforce. And lastly, the last type of cloud service is infrastructure as a service. This is essentially where you rent processing, storage, network, and other fundamental computing resources and deploy your own software and operating systems on top of them. So really, it's like instead of you buying a server and building that server's operating system, installing your applications, it's renting that server compute resources, and this is exactly what RevON Cloud is and what we're going to dive into. So why RevON Cloud? Why does this make sense for your business? I touched upon, kind of the utility model, but, diving into that a little bit further, there's a reduced investment risk. If you've got 5 servers, maybe you've got Server 2003 servers that are coming up on the July Server 2003 end of life schedule. Maybe that hardware is old and you need to replace them. If you go and look and price out replacing those 5 servers, depending upon the size you need, that could easily cost you, tens of thousands of dollars to replace that. And then you still have to maintain the power and the networking and maintain that upgrade schedule every so many years. You also have to size that hardware in a way that it'll last you 5 years. So you have to over-provision your hardware for what you need initially so you have some room to scale. In talking about scalability, it's hard to forecast, especially with the growth of businesses using more applications, more IT needs to run their business. The need to be able to grow their server footprint is important, and it's hard to forecast it all the time. So the server you buy today, you may think you're buying that server for 5 years, but in year 2 or 3 or maybe even year 1, you may have a whole new application that you need to bring in-house, and that server requirements exceed the server hardware you just put in. So now you have to buy another server. So RevON Cloud allows you to scale your infrastructure on demand. You don't have to pay for the infrastructure up front. It's a pay-as-you-go model. You pay for what you use. You can easily scale up. You can easily scale down. It allows you to be flexible and not have to worry about over-provisioning your hardware. You can really create a Goldilocks type environment that's just the right size for your company. A huge feature of RevON Cloud is reliability. RevON Cloud provides enterprise-class redundancy and availability. There's the internet connection out of RevON Cloud is redundant across multiple carriers, multiple fiber lines. It has a very high uptime. You don't have to worry about power or internet outages. The power delivery to RevON Cloud is from multiple utility providers. It has UPS battery backup and also diesel generator backup. So even in cases of extended power outages, if you remember kind of the Hurricane Ike windstorm, I believe it was a few years ago, parts of the city were out of power between 2 and 5 days. RevON Cloud would still be running. And I don't know if you could say that for your own business's infrastructure. And lastly, RevON Cloud has an integrated backup and recovery component. One of the things when I talk to the small businesses that's really hard to always have a good grasp on for them is their backups. It can take the shape of so many different ways of getting that backups done and then getting them off-site. With RevON Cloud, that's integrated directly into RevON Cloud. We can back up what you want, however long you want it. We can shoot it multiple different off-site locations, and you just pay for what you use. It's a really nice add-on to not have to worry about that, the backup infrastructure anymore for those servers. taking a little bit more into the back-end infrastructure or RevON Cloud, talking about the redundancies. All systems are fully redundant. There are, from compute to network to storage, there's multiple pieces of hardware, and in those hardware there's multiple power supplies, there's multiple network cards, there's multiples of everything. The performance, everything's top of the line, name brand, utilizing solid-state accelerated storage, 10 gig network switched backbones, and all of this is monitored 24/7, 365 days a week, automatic notifications to our operations staff, and since everything is designed in a redundant fashion, any hardware failures, which are bound to happen in the lifespan of the hardware, can be corrected on the fly with no interruption to your service. So really, we have a whole server go bad, well, we can replace it without you even skipping a beat on your applications. Now that we've talked a little bit about the back-end infrastructure and kind of why RevON Cloud, I'd like to kind of dive into what kind of the transition to RevON Cloud would look like for your business. And really the migration path is kind of a multi-step approach, a multi-phased approach. The first and the most important piece of this approach is the discovery. And you may be wondering, why do you need a discovery? You know what servers I have, you know what applications I need, but it's not just discovering what applications you have. It's really determining how those applications are used by your business, by your employees. How do those applications interact with other applications or workloads in your environment? What is the application's vendor requirements for bandwidth? When we move this server to RevON Cloud, or this workload to RevON Cloud, it used to be you're accessing that locally on your local network at very fast speeds. What are the requirements when we move that to the cloud? How much bandwidth is needed for you to get to there? And that may mean, do we need to have a bandwidth upgrade in your environment? Do we need to get another internet provider in your environment so you have high availability? All these things can be done in the discovery process, performing interviews with the application stakeholders to really get a good feel for how the application is used, and also to get a really good idea as far as the resources used by these workloads. So when we start the next phase, which is the design, we can actually present a complete picture of what the workloads will look like, what the cost is going to be, and really kind of right-size it for your environment. And as always, we can design it small. We can say, well, it looks like it's going to be, let's start you pretty small. We think, let's see what we use, and then we can basically increase as needed if there's a need. And also in the design is to determine the target for the applications and workloads. Just because we're doing a discovery with RevON Cloud in mind doesn't mean we're going to try and lump everything into the same bucket. Some companies may have different needs than others. You may work with CAD drawings, and you may have a plotter on site, and you need to print these very large CAD drawings, and they're hundreds and hundreds of megabytes. And to do that from RevON Cloud, it may take may take too long than what you're comfortable with doing. So maybe the print server functionality workload doesn't make sense to go to RevON Cloud, or maybe you're still hosting your email in-house, or maybe it's through another email provider. So maybe we look at moving that to Office 365. So really, the design is you determine the target for those applications and workloads, and it may not be RevON Cloud. As always, we try to have the business's best interest in mind, and for whatever's makes sense and is cost effective for the business. And then the last phase is the actual migration, where we stage the cloud environment, get the applications installed, do a kind of a preliminary data migration, perform testing to make sure everything's going to work, and then essentially, complete the migration and go live. So taking a little bit deeper dive into the discovery process, when we do the discovery, we would look for, the types of workloads we're looking at. Microsoft server roles, those are print shares, those are file shares, that's Active Directory, domain name services, DHCP, Microsoft applications, is it SharePoint, Exchange, what other Microsoft services are you using? Custom applications, maybe you have some in-house applications that have been written over the years. We would have to identify those, see if they're compatible for the new environment, what are their bandwidth requirements, and then of course your third-party line of business applications, and what you really run your business on. What makes sense? Is that compatible? Do you have support for that? What does it look like? Do we have to upgrade the version? All of these things need to be done in the discovery process. And then we can also, in interviewing the stakeholders, find out what's critical, and then also find out what the complexity and risk. So taking all of those things together helps us make our design recommendations. What's very important to your business, and is that very easy to move? Is it very difficult to move? Is it even possible to move? Putting all those things together to make the right recommendation in the design phase. To speak a little bit more on the target destination, this is just a kind of a graphic example of what I touched upon a slide ago. Are we looking at a Windows Server 2012 in-house? Maybe we need to keep the file server in-house. Maybe we need a local domain controller we need to keep in-house. Whatever it may be, what makes sense for RevON Cloud? What core critical business application can we get to RevON Cloud? Or maybe it's just a subset of your infrastructure that needs to be highly available for your customers. Maybe that's a very good target for RevON Cloud. It doesn't have to be your entire environment. It can just be a portion of whatever's critical to your business. If your office is offline, do you still want your customers to be able to get to X, Y, or Z application? Do you still want to be able to drive down to Panera or have your employees go home and fire up a VPN connection and get to the RevON Cloud application? And of course, Office 365, which many of you are aware of, Microsoft's kind of suite of cloud applications, SharePoint, hosted Exchange, and Link for instant messaging. Taking a deeper look at the migration process, the staging environment really is kind of the back end. Really, the only kind of interaction, with yourselves would be the testing. Getting the stakeholders involved to perform testing to make sure everything functions as it should be. And then actually doing the go live, the final data migration, on-site support to do the client reconfiguration, evaluating the workloads and the resource utilization to see if there's any tweaking that needs to be done. Do we need to set up any specific monitoring, specific to your business that makes sense to make sure your workload's available? And then of course cleaning up the legacy environment, decommissioning the old hardware, updating our documentation, and then possibly training your staff on ways to access the new workloads, a new VPN connection and such. And as always, the RevON, the Revolution Group kind of project engineers, are dedicated to ensuring, project successes, for our customers and really treating that as our #1 priority. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about RevON Cloud and the migration process and kind of the back-end infrastructure, hopefully that gives you a little bit of a feel of kind of what the, what RevON Cloud really is, kind of a, what possibilities could there be for your business, really, looking at the next steps. If this is something that looks like it's something you're interested in, I'd advise to talk to your account manager, your VCIO, and say, this is something I'm kind of interested in. Does this make sense for me? And, we can start that conversation and maybe we can do a preliminary look and see, well, just taking a quick glance, we see X, Y, or Z might be a good item to workload to move to RevON Cloud, and then maybe we take a step further and start doing a further discovery on that workload. But, for next steps, just contact your account manager, VCIO. As always, you can contact me directly. My phone number is on the screen. I've talked to many of you guys. You guys have my email address. If you have a quick question, you can type it into your GoToMeeting now. I think we've got a couple questions in already. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Ratterman.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, we did have a couple questions come up throughout the course of the presentation. Our first question was asking about where is the cloud actually located?
So so when we talk about RevON Cloud, it's located here in Columbus. It is in a Tier 3 data center, hardened against tornado and fire and physical security and all those good things. So it was very important when placing the location of RevON Cloud that it be local, local to our customers, because we have to get their data migrated from point A to point B. And trying to do that over a WAN connection is not something that is always possible. So it's nice to be able to forklift or sneaker net, as we like to call it, shuffle your data across town and get it input into the RevON Cloud environment. So it's a local, presence that we can feel and we can touch. We're not relying on remote operators or technicians to manage and monitor. We do that ourselves.
Okay, great. Next question is around cost. So how much does it cost to have a server in the RevON Cloud?
So this is a big variable. Obviously it depends upon what workload is in there, how much CPU and RAM and storage is it, how much data is being backed up. All of these things, do you need VPN access to it? All of these things are kind of like little bits and blocks. And you basically take all those bits and blocks you need, and they all have a price associated with them, and you add them all together, and that outputs kind of the total per server. So, it can vary. I don't want to put a price tag on it because each environment's different. And really, talk to your account manager, your VCIO. They can give you a kind of a ballpark, more tailored to your environment. I really don't want to give a too generic of an answer today.
Okay. We had one more question around security. So what is the security like for the cloud?
So when talking security, we talk about logical security, we talk about physical security. The logical security, so the RevON Cloud is a multi-tenant environment. We don't have separate hardware just for you. There's multiple customers sitting on that hardware, but everything is logically separated. Customer A can't see customer B, and vice versa. The network goes across different paths. They're not able to talk. They're all addressed differently. Everything, those endpoints are protected by a firewall, and only things that we want to talk to each other are allowed to talk to each other. And as such, it is also, everything's protected by a firewall. For the WAN access, WAN security. For the local security, it is isolated between tenants, and the physical security is, pretty neat. Essentially, to get into the data center, you first have to basically be buzzed into the parking lot. So you have to kind of say who you are, where you're from, make sure that checks out. You can't just have a random stranger coming into the parking lot. And once you get in, you have to have a badge to swipe to get into the door. When your identity there has to be visually identified to make sure you are who you say you are, and then it's a biometric scan, and then it's escorted access to the RevON environment. So it is a case where the security is taken very seriously. Everything is video monitored. All entries, exits are audited and logged, and it is a very secure environment. And again, this isn't something that you need to concern yourself with. You don't have to go to the data center yourselves, but just to kind of show you how serious we are and committed we are to protecting the environment and your data.
All right. We actually had one more come in asking about, do we have redundancy for our equipment? For example, if something were to happen to the site, is the data also available and stored elsewhere?
Yeah, so that's one of the options for the backup and recovery. So let's say you want to go above and beyond all the redundant hardware and the redundant power and the redundant internet. That's all built in and included in the RevON Cloud. You can't choose to not be highly available and get RevON Cloud. If you're in RevON Cloud, you have a highly available scenario. But if you want to take that a step further and you wanted your backups off-site, we can easily replicate those backups to 7 different locations across the country, all on a 40 gig backbone to different data centers. So it allows us to have that data replicated to a 3rd location if you so choose. There are also options for full disaster recovery. It's kind of outside of our normal RevON Cloud pricing, but if that was something you're interested in, we could definitely architect a solution to kind of have live migrated copies of your virtual machines in a outside state's data center.
Okay, great. It looks like that should be all the questions that we have. So again, if there anything else comes up, or if you have any suggestions about future webinars that we will be hosting, again, our Twitter handle is @rev_group with the hashtag of Lunch and Learn. Any further questions, feel free to direct them to Scott Coffman. His information is listed on the screen. And if there's nothing else that comes up, we hope to see everyone in a month. And thank you again for attending.
Thanks all.
Thanks.